Dr. Crystal here. Are you having a hard time sticking to your vegetarian diet? Stick around to find out why with our special guest, Dr. Catherine Forestell.
You're listening to Live Foreverish, a show dedicated to helping you live just a little longer. Here's your hosts, Dr. Mike and Dr. Crystal Gossard.
All right, Dr. Mike, I'm excited about this talk.
Yeah, well, it's food related. You get really excited about anything food related.
It's food related. It's a colleague of mine. I met her at the American Society of Nutrition conference. We had a great conversation over dinner, and I invited her to the show. And I think it's an interesting topic. There were a couple of different topic ideas I had in mind. But we decided to kind of focus in on vegetarian diet.
You were a vegetarian for a while. No, vegan. You were a vegan for a while.
I have done. Yes, I've tried both.
Okay.
I've tried both. But, we can talk about that when our guest comes in. Catherine Forestell, she's a professor of psychological sciences at William and Mary. Her research examines the development of food preferences and eating behaviors across the lifespan with an emphasis on the biological, psychological, and cultural factors that shape dietary choices. She has published extensively on topics including infant feeding practices, sensory perception, and the psychology of vegetarianism and plant-based diets. Dr. Forestell, thank you. Welcome to the show.
Thanks
for joining us. Now,
Happy to be here.
I'll tell you, you really scaled back your bio. I said, there's so much more here that she could say. I just want you listeners to know her experience is extensive. You are also the director of the neuroscience program.
Yeah.
And you have almost 70 publications as author or co-author.
She has one of those bios that make the rest of us who have terminal degrees look like slackers.
I know. Like, what are we doing? So,
thank you
again for taking time out of your busy, the school season, the school year is about to start. So you're taking time to talk to us. And I think it's an important talk. Now, I'll quickly say the other topic that I wanted to talk to you about, but I think this is more relevant, but we started talking about food preferences in children. And
that's still a good topic.
And that was kind of our dinner conversation and the psychology of that and presenting different foods when they're younger. And maybe we talked about the study where you add ketchup to everything and then they eat it. I'm not sure. But but this is probably a more applicable topic for us to discuss. And it's really food preference. You run the Eating Behavior and Development Lab, and you investigate cognitive, social, environmental mechanisms that contribute to food preferences. And one food preference that you investigate is vegetarianism and how it relates to well-being. Now, we know that this term can mean many things to different people, and some strictly avoid meat. And so what we would like is maybe you sharing information on how you define vegetarianism in your work, in your research, just so that we can kind of lay the groundwork for our discussion.
Yeah, so in our research, we don't treat vegetarianism as a single rigid category. Instead, we view it along a continuum. And at one end of this continuum are vegans or plant-based dieters who typically avoid all animal source foods. And then after that, there are lacto-ovo vegetarians who are a little less extreme. They avoid meat, but they don't eat eggs or dairy. They don't eat meat, but they do eat eggs and dairy. And then there are people who only eat certain types of meat. So for example, pescatarians who only eat fish. And then at the other extreme end of the category are people who follow plant-based diets, but occasionally eat meat. And some people refer to those people as flexitarians.
Ah.
My colleague John Neslick and I also refer to omnivores who reduce their meat intake occasionally as reducitarians. So
That's another one, Dr. Mike.
Reduce the That's a new one.
reducitarians. Yeah,
We're adding a
and
lot of
other people
Atarians.
have used that term as well. So, you know, there's quite a continuum when we start thinking about people who reduce their meat intake.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, this is important because people's motivations, their behaviors, and their experiences can vary dramatically depending on where they fall on this continuum. So, for example, someone who avoids all animal source foods may be constantly reminded that they don't fit into a world where meat eating is the norm. Whereas these experiences may be less common for flexitarians on the other end of the continuum. So in terms of motivation, someone who occasionally eats meat may be motivated by health or environmental concerns, whereas someone who avoids all animal products may also be driven by ethical concerns or identity-based reasons. So if we recognize these differences, we can better understand dietary adherence and processes that support or challenge these choices.
Yeah, you know, you're the PhD, the professor. You complicated everything for me right there.
No,
but I no, it's great. This is why I would love to be a student in her class and, you know, taking my notes and learning all this. But you have vegetarians. I just want to kind of get it more straight in my head, right? Do we know, like, or is this even, these kind of stats even kept? Do we know in the U.S. population what's the prevalence of just, I guess, a strict vegetarian? Like not just take that spectrum stuff away.
So
just
you're
for a moment.
saying, but you're saying vegetarian as in plant and no meat, but some animal product, meaning you will still eat eggs.
Yeah. I'm not talking about the vegan part. I just the vegetarian part of it.
Right. So vegetarians are probably about, and estimates vary, but probably about 5% of the population.
Okay.
So
I thought it would have been larger than that, to be honest with you.
Most people do. And I think that's because more people are starting to reduce their meat intake. And so we're seeing people who are on that continuum, but may not be as strict as a lacto-ovo vegetarian or a vegan.
Well, you know, something you said earlier really stands out to me as a nutritionist, or even on our show, where we are encouraging sometimes a certain type of eating pattern, and we're saying this is what's been shown to be healthy. But if only a certain percentage of people are, let's say, vegetarians, then you may not find the accessibility there. Like you mentioned, maybe you're going out to restaurants, and I experienced this, and there's not much for you to eat, like not as many options available. And then now that leads to psychological stress. Like I recall when I was a vegan, there were times where I felt stress. I felt stress at family events. I would go home to visit my mom, and I felt bad that I was not eating the food that she was preparing.
You know, I can see that. Yeah, and when you're at restaurants, right? If you're a vegan or a strict vegetarian, a lot of times they can maybe make something for you, but it's not like on the menu or a meal. It's not like a vegetarian meal, right? Just throwing a bunch of broccoli and maybe carrots on a plate or something and calling it that. So where are you? So when you're studying all this, you're looking at the spectrum here. You know, do most people, like if you've been eating a normal standard American diet for years and years and years and years, and you want to start changing, are you saying people should start slow and, you know, maybe just be a reducitarian? I don't know if I'm saying that right.
Reducitarian.
For a little bit, and just kind of work your way down and just see where you end up and where you're comfortable. Is that kind of the approach being taught?
Well, and certainly that's one approach that someone can take. The approach you take is very individual. And often people will start by limiting maybe one type of food. So maybe they will limit meat, but they'll allow themselves to eat fish, for example, and that's where they'll start as a pescatarian. And what's interesting is that once you enter sort of that world, you become associated with other people. You become part of a community of people who reduce their meat intake. And you start to learn about the values that are associated with that diet, because this is more than just a diet. It also reflects beliefs. And so you start realizing, wow, my reduction of meat here I think it's really helping the environment. It's good for my health. And I'm killing less animals. And so then you start thinking, well, maybe I'll stop eating fish, and you become a lacto-ovo vegetarian. And so the process goes, right? And so as the old saying goes, old habits die hard. And so changing one's behavior, their eating habits, for example, can be difficult. And so, some people might not have the motivation to make this change over the long term, but those people who start becoming part of a community and start seeing their values change, well, then that motivation increases to continue. And so we see that these dietary changes are also associated with certain beliefs. Which in turn motivates them to maybe become more of, a more strict vegetarian.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, does it also motivate them to make positive changes in other areas of their life? I wonder if it's almost like,
Does it
you know
spill
what, I
over?
can
Yeah.
do this. I can't believe it, because I've seen it's, the vegans that every conversation somehow they have to tell you that they're a vegan. It's like not even related to food. By the way, yeah, I'm a vegan. And so they're so proud of this idea that this is something that they're able to do. And then does it trickle into being more aware of other healthier lifestyle strategies, such as exercise, or maybe such as getting sleep? Is it kind of a good first step sometimes, or are you seeing that in research?
That's such an interesting question, and it's one that hasn't really been explored. I think it depends on the types of motivations that people have. Because just because you're a vegetarian doesn't mean you're eating a healthier diet. And many people, right? Many people make that assumption. If you are a vegetarian and you give up eating meat and you replace it with, carbs, and you're not eating any vegetables,
French fries.
right? Yes, not a healthy diet. But for those who are motivated by health and are adopting a vegetarian diet in order to become healthier, I would think that would enable them over time to acquire or to bring in other behaviors that are health related. Or maybe, they already have those, behaviors in their repertoire, and eating, this change in eating was one that they felt enabled to do because of those other behaviors. Yeah. So I think it depends on the motivation.
Okay. I have a question. I'm going to try to formulate it.
Okay.
Because it's interesting. So we already know that people will try, and I'm just going to call it vegetarian for now. I'm not going to get on it. People will try a vegetarian diet, maybe slowly, maybe quickly, whatever, for various reasons. Some ethical, some health, et cetera, et cetera. Has your research shown which type of person, which type of motivation, which type of personality is more likely to adopt, I should say successfully adopt, a healthy vegetarian lifestyle?
Right. Well, there are various motivations that induce people to stop eating meat. One, as we've talked about, might be health. I believe that reducing meat in my diet will make me a healthier person. Other people are more ethically driven. So they're worried about the effects of eating meat on the environment. They're worried about animal welfare. And so these tend to be the three most common motivations that people will cite for why they became a vegetarian or why they maintain their vegetarian habits. And it appears that those people who are ethically driven, i.e., are concerned about animal welfare or are concerned about the environment, tend to be able to maintain their diet for longer. But of course, how long you're able to do this for people who are in environments where they have lots of support, where they have other friends who are eating a similar diet, where it's more normalized, then they are probably experiencing less of what we call minority stress, right? They're less likely to encounter people who are teasing them for their food dietary habits, or they are in an environment where it's easier to obtain meals. Where it's less stressful, as you were saying.
Listen, that I think is a big point. Honestly, because I can tell you, like, I have to imagine that there are some areas where there are vegetarian restaurants, even vegan restaurants, in bigger cities where you have better choices versus out some areas. I live out in Central Texas, and there's places out there where it's just all barbecue. I mean, what are you going to do? I mean, I mean? Like, there's no place to go. You'd have to cook every meal yourself. So I got to imagine that has an impact as well, right?
Right. So engaging in behavioral change is easier with support and normalization. So being able to find a restaurant where you can find vegetarian options that are diverse and interesting and tasty, that's going to make a big difference.
Well, and when you think about minority stress, the one thing that stood out, and this is just my personal experience again, is in my home. You can have minority stress, in my opinion. You can clarify in your home if you're trying to make a healthy change.
Yeah.
Oh,
and the whole family is not on board. It needs to be a family affair, or you're unlikely to be.
It's too hard.
Successful,
it's
right?
Too hard. Yeah,
it's too hard. So I think that's another kind of key takeaway for our listeners is try to rally the troops. When everybody, if you're trying to, and this is not just with vegetarian. If you're trying to limit processed foods or whatever to sugar, then the kids, you can't buy it for your kids. You can't.
It's gonna be so hard.
Look at him. He's getting sad. The husband, the partner, like, we all need to be on board with this so that I don't have minority stress.
No, it has to be. You can't. It has to be a compromise. You can't. Maybe could go. Like, what do you think? Like.
So yeah, it's interesting. So my 16-year-old stepdaughter, now she's 24, but when she was 16, she decided she wanted to become a vegetarian. At that point, my husband and I were both omnivores. And I have to say, I look back and it wasn't one of my shining moments, but I was sort of rolled my eyes and I was like, oh my gosh, like, this is going to be such a pain. But actually it wasn't. We started to become more familiar with vegetarian foods. And if we wanted to have meat, we would cook the base first and add the meat later. So we would save some for her without the meat, and we would add meat, separately. And so there are ways in which you can adjust. And it's all about sort of respecting those other people. So you can see why for a young person who's a teenager who wants to explore this, it can be very difficult because they're not the ones buying the groceries and making the decisions of what's going to be eaten in the household.
Yeah.
And it can also be difficult for a parent who's trying to cook for a partner and children in the house who may not be on board. So I completely understand, what you're talking about, Crystal.
Yeah. Don't you bring up something, another point. We're just going off. I don't care. So you mentioned your daughter was a teenager, right? So
Yeah.
is there a how do I say? Is there a better age to try all this stuff? Because as a medical doctor, when I hear a teenager wanting to be a vegetarian, the first thing I say, well, how am I going to teach her to make sure she's getting her protein?
Right.
Right.
Is
that, so are there certain ages where you kind of already understand that makes it more successful, or you just got to make sure the teenager has the support and the education?
And to piggyback off that, even if it's not protein, just making sure they're not going down a path toward like not a good relationship with food.
Yeah.
With food.
We don't want those kind of Yeah.
Right. And those are all very valid concerns. Iron is a real issue as well. And so, yes, you want to be sure that you have advice from your doctor, that you check in with your physician about dietary changes. But your question is there a good age? And I think it really depends on the individual and their surroundings, right? How much support is that teenager going to get? And to what extent is the family going to ensure that teenager is getting a balanced diet, even though they are no longer eating meat? So getting protein, getting enough sources of iron, etc. B12 is another concern, right? So, monitoring that child and ensuring that this is not associated with some unhealthy relationship with food is also very important.
You're listening to Live Foreverish with Dr. Catherine Forestell. Dr. Forestell, as we kind of wrap this up, do you have what would be your final words of wisdom or advice for that person who is kind of interested in making a dietary change? Maybe they're thinking of becoming a vegetarian, and what strategies would you give them to help them to be successful?
Oh, yes, that is the big question. Well, first, being a vegetarian, as I say, is as much a part, it's not just a dietary change, it's usually associated with shifts in social identity. And so finding a community of other people with similar beliefs, similar dietary habits is important. And that can be online. So for example, there's a group where I live called Vegans of Hampton Roads. And I'm part of that group because I'm very interested in them. And I hear about all kinds of cool restaurants in the area and interesting new vegan items. And so being part of the community can be very supportive. Also, we see that meat is very masculinized in our society as a result of gender roles. And so as a young man who is considering a vegetarian diet, it might be more difficult. Like someone like that might experience more minority stress. And so certainly having a supportive environment is especially important for those individuals.
Dr. Forestell, fantastic information. Thank you for joining us here on Live Foreverish. And Dr. Mike, we want to tell our listeners and our viewers, if you would like to hear more awesome podcasts, they can head over to liveforeverish.com, where you can find over 310 podcasts there, and make sure you like, share, comment, subscribe. You can also find the video version of our podcast on youtube.com/lifeextensionwellness. And when you're at liveforeverish.com, you can find our sponsor, Life Extension. They want to say thank you with a special offer. Type in, set up your cart, and at checkout, type in the code podcast to receive 10% off $50 or more, plus free shipping and handling. Again, that is at lifeextension.com. Once again, thank you for listening. I'm Dr. Crystal.
I'm Dr. Mike.
Have a great day.